Hi, welcome back. I hope you had a nice couple of days. I know I did. We had really sunny, warm weather here for the last couple of days, and the snow is pretty much melted off my garden and the glacier in the backyard. And today, however, it's gray and windy and a little colder, and I'm just tired. I think for this story, I should probably be like sipping a cerveza and eating chips and salsa because it takes place in Mexico or Hawaii, but it's just much more of a tea day. It's funny how these times I was really productive over the weekend, just boom, 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 go, 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 and now that it's passed and Chip is back at work at the lumberyard, which is always a concern to me. I mean, they wear masks and no one can go in the store, and we still don't have any cases of the virus here, but so people are getting restless on the one hand, and on the other hand, those of us like me who have somebody out there working want to make sure that everybody stays safe. I did want to tell you after the last one, I had saved my external fixolator thing. Remember, like the red badge of courage? I can't open it, but there's a bolt here, and these come out sideways. And so if you imagine this opened up, and I don't know if you can see those were the pins that were in my hips. So this thing went on you just like a brace, and then it screwed into your hips. And it's made out of carbon fiber and titanium. And I've kept it. I keep it on the shelf by my desk just to remind me, I guess. And I had thought about maybe making something out of it, like cutting a little piece of it, making a necklace or something, but then I didn't really want to. So, it's a good afternoon to read a little story and pass the time. And this is another one about one of my favorite people, kind of like the story about Mark Sebens and the tsunami. And it's chapter 12 now of Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs. And this chapter is called Muerte Beach. And the epigraph in front of it is from the 90th Psalm. So teach us to number our days. I need some tea before I start this. It's just that kind of day, It's decaf, too. It's an Earl Grey decaf because I didn't sleep well last night either. I've been having those weird kind of dreams that you don't really remember, but you wake up and you're upset about something. Happens. Anyway, you could blame this is why I want to read this, because this is a good story. You could blame the 3 recent Haines weddings in Hawaii on what happens when sun, heat, and fresh fruit-starved Alaskans fly from the bitter cold and darkness into the bright light of warm tropical beaches in the middle of February. Sue Nelson and Tim June were in Hawaii to attend one of the other local weddings when they decided to go ahead and get married themselves. It was so spur of the moment that Sue didn't have time to buy a dress or invite many of her close friends. They found a minister in the phone book, called her up, explained that they were thinking about getting married but weren't going to be in Hawaii much longer and hoped it could be done that day. The minister wanted a little more information. She was concerned about vacationers rushing into something as important as marriage. She knew that tropical paradise has a way of making normally cool-headed, not to mention cold-footed, Alaskans behave recklessly. She was also aware that half of all marriages end in divorce and was doing her part to make sure the union she blessed batted a little closer to 1,000. She suggested that Tim and Sue wait until they knew each other better. Maybe they could return to Hawaii next year for a properly planned wedding. That's when Tim said that he and Sue had been sweethearts since junior high. They had lived together since they were in college. They had been in love for 36 years. The minister begged to marry them. It would be wonderful to preside at a ceremony for a couple who had already tested and survived the better and worse, sickness and health, and richer and poorer parts of the vows, and still had no quarrels with any of it. Even if they hadn't had all that going for them, it would have been very hard to turn down Sue and Tim if she had met them in person. Sue is pretty, blonde, quick to smile, laughs as much as Tim does, and is so kind to everyone. She is as apolitical as Tim is political. And Tim, well, as my friend and editor Tom says, what's not to like about a guy who is thrilled about waking up each morning? It's fun to be around someone who is never having a bad day. I had hoped that Tim and Sue would get married when we were together in Mexico. The Thanksgiving after my accident, I had gone there with them and a group of mothers and our daughters and single women. It was officially a woman's trip, but Tim came along too, and because Tim is Tim, everyone was fine with it. Besides, it was a good idea to have one man around as a chaperone, especially one who speaks Spanish fluently and has a way of making friends with everyone, from the local guy who drives the water truck to the couple from Beverly Hills renting the house next door. I like being home. I don't have any urge to see foreign shores. I come from the Dorothy School of Life. Everything I am looking for is right in my own backyard. Unlike George Bailey, I don't pine for the sound of train whistles or ship horns. But Tim, as I've said, is hard to say no to. Even more so when you are flat on your back and taking large doses of morphine, as I was that May when he and Sue and everyone else talked me into the trip. The first morning in Mexico, I asked my friend Lisa what time it was. Who cares, she said. She was wearing a big yellow straw hat, a small blue and yellow bikini, and Audrey Hepburn sunglasses. She looked like a movie star. She's a first grade teacher in an international school in Korea. She and her husband used to teach in Alaska. Now they return to their Haines cabin each summer. I had asked Lisa what time it was because I was wondering when lunch was. If you're hungry, go eat, Lisa said. This is Mexico. Relax. A few weeks earlier, Chip and I had been sitting by the fire, listening to the north wind blow, when he asked, what do people do on vacation in Mexico? I said they probably go to the beach. That's all? They just do nothing? He couldn't quite wrap his hard-working Norwegian heart around that one. Then he predicted, you won't like it very much. I had already bought the tickets. JJ's and Stoley's flip-flops, swimsuits, and shorts were packed. Their older sisters were taking trips of their own. My friends were even reminding me to buy precautions like charcoal tablets. So you won't get sick, Anna said. The charcoal absorbs toxins in the water. Toxins in the water. Now Chip and our son were in a wall tent on the edge of a snowy cove on a wilderness island south of Haines, and my friends and I were a few thousand miles farther down the same coast in a rented beach house in Sayulita, a fishing and tourist town not all that different from home. Well, except for the weather and the palm trees and the soft, ripe avocados. Tim became Timoteo once he was south of the border, and in his faded tropical shorts and sandals, he looked the part of an expat American right out of a Jimmy Buffett song. He reminds me of Mark that way. They are both free-spirited, beach-loving guys. His hair seemed to be longer, curlier, and lighter than when we'd left, although close up, those highlights were gray, just like mine. Every time we walked the dusty trail to town, I'd look at him and hum, down in the banana republics, things aren't as warm as they seem, or, wasting away in Margaritaville. Searching for my lost shaker of salt. Anyway. I was surprised one afternoon when he put on his half glasses to read. Is that my friend Tim, I wondered, or a friend of my dad's? Are we 25 or 50? Where did the years go? But rather than be sad about time passing, I was grateful to be there and pleased that both Tim and I had made it that far. We've both had close calls. Tim and Sue had been a couple so long that it's rare to use their names singularly. They are mostly Tim and Sue, or even the shorter and more intertwined Sim2, which is also the name of Tim's boat building and carpentry business. Tim can do just about anything he puts his mind to, except win a seat in the Alaska State House or Senate. His Republican opponents have labeled him an extreme environmentalist, and in Alaska, that is not a compliment. It's a tribute to Tim's good nature that his races are as close as they are, and even his political enemies like him. Tim taught himself how to be a cabinet maker, a wood carver, a boat builder, and a commercial fisherman. He can repair a diesel engine, wire solar panels and wind generators, plumb a bathroom, and give a public policy speech to a crowded convention center. He is as comfortable in paint-splattered coveralls with 2 days' worth of stubble on his face as he is in khakis and a tweed blazer looking like your favorite high school English teacher. When we were building our house, he was the one who figured out how to design and construct the staircase. Tim and Sue have been at our holiday dinners for 20 years. When the children were small, Sue slept over one Christmas Eve because she wanted to be there when they woke up, stumbled out of bed in their pajamas, and saw the magic of the tree surrounded by gifts. At our house, there are no presents in sight until Christmas morning. Chip and I hide them in our bedroom and set them out after midnight mass. On Sue's 40th birthday, quite a few years back now, Tim rented the Haynes Senior Center and organized a family board game party. Everyone who came in the door had to fill out a name tag as a Nelson, because Tim said Sue always wanted a big family that played games together. So he gave her one. All of us. Tim and Sue never had children because Tim's cancer treatments had made him infertile. He was 19 years old when he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. 2/3 of the way through debilitating radiation treatments, his doctor suggested he save some sperm because the next round might harm his ability to reproduce. After what Tim called the weird and humiliating sperm bank visit, he learned that the treatments had already killed his future babies. It was a surprise to his doctors. This had a lot to do with the decision Tim made a few weeks later. He was sitting in a hospital room while the same team of physicians marked him up with tattoo targets for radiation beams. While they worked on him, they talked about cameras. Tim was a pretty good photographer in those days. No doubt you've gathered by now that Tim is pretty good at anything he takes an interest in. One of the doctors was talking about his own new camera, a Yashica 35mm. He said it was the best one money could buy. At the time, Nikons were the industry standard. Tim knew that. So I'm sitting there listening to them and thinking, they can afford any camera they want, and this guy buys a Yashica? He doesn't know enough to buy a good camera, so how's he going to cure me? It reminded me of the comment my mother made when the space shuttle exploded. She said, "I'm not surprised. I can't even find anyone who knows how to fix the toaster." So Tim left. He left the hospital, his parents' home, and Sue, or at least the nearness of her, she was finishing college, and headed for the clean air and fresh water of the San Bernardino Mountains, where he restored his body and soul and began living as if he were dying. Then he came to Alaska, where he was convinced that the environment could save him, or at least buy him some years. His doctors had promised him that if he finished the treatments, he had an 85% chance of surviving. If he walked away, they said, he wouldn't live 6 months. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. I know I'm not supposed to touch my face, and I have a face mask somewhere, and it's not the virus. It's hay fever. Like I said, things are starting to bud and green up just a little bit, and just enough to make me sneeze. Oh, that tea tastes so good right now. Tim, as I said, the doctors told him that he had 6 months to live if he didn't do the treatments. And remember, he was 19, and when you're 19, you know a lot. And luckily, the stuff that Tim knew at 19 was correct, because Tim is 54 now, and that was when I wrote this, so that was a while ago. Tim is 65 now. Tim is 54 now in this book, He is sitting at my kitchen table. We are having leftover chicken and pesto for lunch. I have been trying to get him to build another bookcase in our living room for 3 years. Don Nash ended up making it instead, and he had just installed it before Tim came by with his notebook and tape measure. When I showed him it was already finished, Tim laughed. "Oh, good, I really didn't have the time anyway." But he was not too busy to stay for lunch. He never is. He spends his days doing what he wants to do, rather than things he needs to do. His belief that his cancer was caused in large part by environmental pollution has spurred him to devote his time to campaigning for the environment, especially for clean air and water. He does most of it for free, though he is neither retired nor independently wealthy. He gets by. Sue's part-time job supports them both, and the small carpentry jobs he squeezes in between the hours he spends saving the world help. He does have a fishing boat and fishes commercially when he isn't too busy. Some summers, he is more successful than others. Tim drops everything, though, if a friend gets sick, especially with cancer. He offers guidance and support. He researches all the options. He sits in hospital rooms in Seattle. He asks the doctors questions and listens very carefully to their answers. He built my wheelchair ramps, and he visited my recovery bed, often. It is always good to see Tim. When he was running for the legislature, I hosted a fundraiser. I had never even attended a political fundraiser before, and while I lean left of center, I'm not as far over as Tim. But I would rather have a friend in Juneau than someone I don't know at all, someone who might not listen or who might not have the courage to disagree with me the way I know Tim would. For a gentle-mannered guy, he can be pretty gutsy. When Tim wants to attract the attention of a mining company or cruise line official who argues that there is such a thing as an acceptable limit to the waste they can burn, bury, or discharge into the land, air, or water, he will take off his shirt and show the scar where his chest was peeled open in order to remove half a lung. Then he asks, which part per billion would be okay if it killed your son, your wife, or your neighbor? But when we were in Mexico and someone asked about the same scar, Tim just said, "Shark bite, great white," and laughed. Tim is an active member of Lynn Canal Conservation, the Haines Environmental Group, the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, and the Alaska Marine Conservation Council, a spokesman for Alaska Community Action on Toxics, and a founder of the Alaska Clean Water Alliance. He worked for former Alaska Governor Tony Knowles as an environmental policy advisor. In between meetings and public hearings, he has built a small, creative, Victorian-style home for Sue and him at Paradise Cove. Well, actually, he is still building it, along with the alternative solar and wind systems that power it. His old Toyota Land Cruiser may soon be running on French fry grease from the bamboo room. After Tim became sick, everything changed for the then sweethearts, Tim and Sue. They had planned to marry after college and live in the sunshine of their Southern California youth. Tim had even thought about going to the U.S. Air Force Academy. But instead, he traveled to Haines to work with a friend on a wood carving project at Alaska Indian Arts. Lee Heinmiller, who now runs AIA as his father did before him, met Tim at the ferry terminal in a February snowstorm. The snow was coming down so thick and fast that they couldn't even see the mountains. But Tim said it was love at first deep breath. It was the first time I felt at home in my life, he told me. What home meant had changed because Tim had. He had walked into the hospital an athletic 19-year-old and left moving like a feeble-bodied 80-year-old. His startling free fall from healthy to half dead taught him early that everyone could be just a checkup away from the same fate. People in wheelchairs, homeless people, sick people, and dying people, Tim realized, were all the same as him. It was a revelation to a California golden boy. Thanks to cancer, he had gained, and has kept, the wisdom and compassion of a much older man. After graduating from college, Sue joined Tim in Haines, and they embarked on a life together defined by his illness. They lived hour to hour, day to day. The main thing was that they were together and making the most of Tim's brief time on Earth. They lucked into jobs longshoring, where they worked 3 or 4 days a month and made enough cash to eat and pay rent. They fished, picked berries, baked bread, and made their own yogurt. All we wanted to do was to be with each other and have fun, Tim said. They hoped he'd make it to 30. Sue found a job in the borough office, and Tim started building a sailboat, working on it whenever he could. It was, he said, Plan C. Plan A had been curing his cancer, and Plan B had been skipping the cure to move to Alaska. When the cancer caught up with him, they both assumed it would, Tim planned to sail off into the sunrise and never return. You can't sail very far into the sunset out of Haines without running into the side of a fjord. If you want to leave local waters, you have to head south and east, down Lynn Canal between steep mountains. Tim decided to create a reproduction of L. Francis Herreshoff's 36-foot ketch, Nerea, N-E-R-E-I-A, Nerea, a grand pleasure boat from the heyday of sailing yachts. It was my meditation, my coffin, my ark, he says now, fairly quietly. It took him longer than Noah had to build it, about 9.5 years. He milled the yellow cedar for the hull and then dried and planed it. He collected old lead from car batteries and weights and melted it down for the keel. He cast the bronze fittings, sewed the sails, scavenged portholes and cabin skylights. The Kiku, named for the perfume Sue wore in junior high, looks as though it belongs in Newport rather than tied up between the fishing boats in the Haines Harbor. Her dark green hull, glossy varnished trim, cream-colored cabin, fir decks, boldly raked Sitka spruce masts, and carved bowsprit are all, as our friend and road construction company owner Roger Schnabel says, very impressive. After the boat was launched at a big party at Letnikoff Cove out by the cannery, with Roger driving the front-end loader that gently lowered the trailer with the Kiku on it down the ramp and into the water, after Sue had christened it with a bottle of champagne and everyone cheered, after Tim had motored it around the peninsula to the harbor in front of town and stepped the mast and rigged the halyards, carefully following the designer specifications, after just about everything was done except the curtains hung on the portholes in the main salon, Tim asked me if I'd help teach him to sail. His first test was the Juneau Yacht Club's Spirit of Adventure race, which took place over summer solstice. Tim, Alex, a sailing friend from California, and I took turns at the helm and trimming the sails. The 200-mile course begins and ends in Juneau and circles the Admiralty Island National Monument. The island's Tlingit name, Kutsnuwu, means Fortress of the Bears. It is where Chip and Christian and Roger and his boys had set up their wall tent to hunt deer while the rest of us were in Mexico. In a good year, the sailboat race takes about 3 days, including a mandatory layover at Baranof Warm Springs, a tiny, almost ghost town with a natural hot springs where we all soaked in metal horse troughs set in the fast-moving and steamy creek. Tim, Alex, and I put our swimsuits on, climbed into one of the horse troughs, ducked down so just our heads was showing and it looked like we were naked, and took a picture, joking that we should send it as a Christmas card and make everyone wonder what happened to my family and Sue and Alex's girlfriend. Let's give them something to talk about, Tim said. The Kiku was the star of the regatta, mainly because she was so beautiful, so old-fashioned, and so sturdy. People couldn't believe Tim had built her. She's the kind of sailboat that helps you understand why boats are referred to in the feminine. She's also the kind of boat sailors dream of, but take one look at and say they'd never have the time for the upkeep, all that wood, varnish, and brass. Everyone wondered how Tim could afford it and where he found the time to build and maintain it. Tim smiled and shrugged. He and Sue had lived in a rented room upstairs at Alaska Indian Arts during the years Tim was working on the boat. His other car isn't a Bentley, it's that rusty Toyota. Other crews were wet and cold from the spray and the wind and relying on freeze-dried meals, while we were sitting high and dry on a cushioned bench in the cozy cockpit with the turkey breast roasting in the big oil stove in the galley below. The strong winds during the first leg worked in our favor as the long, heavy hull cut smoothly into the waves. Late or early in the twilight of the second, or maybe the third day, somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, the sky turned all orangey pink and lavender, and it was as if sunrise and sunset had combined. It never did get dark on this longest day of the year. We were a little sleepy. Although we had promised one another to rest and work in traditional 4-hour watches, we didn't. None of us wanted to miss anything, from the chance of seeing a pod of killer whales to the moonrise over the snow-capped mountains. Also, when it became clear how well Tim's boat could sail, and that with the handicap rating we might even win the race, we started actively competing, trimming and retrimming and changing head sails and tacking for better angles, adjusting the draft of the mainsail and the mizzen, and working the tides and the currents to our best advantage. Tim may not have had as much experience sailing as Alex and I did, but he knew the area well from his years of fishing. We were a good team. It was sometime in that gorgeous, dusky, middle-of-the-night dawn when the wind died down and we coasted quietly with our biggest jib gently tugging at the lines as water lapped the hull, and it was so quiet and so lovely that Tim asked if I believed in soulmates, if I thought one's partner in life was predetermined. I said I wasn't sure, that it was a chicken and egg kind of thing. If you think someone is your soulmate, you'll make it so. Tim said he thought it was something determined before you were born. Tim and Sue may have wed in Hawaii, but they still had a Haines reception. The theme, naturally, was tropical, with fabric lace, flowered shirts, and sticky blender drinks. Tom from the paper and his wife Jane hosted the bash at a friend's house. The owners were on vacation, and Tom and Jane had come down from their cabin in the woods, which has no running water and is a long snowshoe from the road, to house sit. Here's where Jane will say, "We have running water. We have to run and get it." Although she'll say it in an Australian accent. On the deck, out in single-digit temperatures, the grill was smoking away with halibut kebabs. In the living room, 2 laptops ran slideshows of all 3 local but Hawaiian weddings. While I was interested in the others, I soaked up the pictures of the most mature newlyweds. Sue blushed, Tim beamed. Tim is used to smiling at weddings. He has married a few people in that Alaska way in which anyone can be a marriage commissioner for a day. I've even done it, officiating at the marriage of my friend Linus's daughter. Tim has been asked often because of his long relationship with Sue, his sense of humor, and his thoughtful but not preachy manner. Most recently, he also conducted difficult memorial services for 2 of his neighbors. Unlike a wedding, this does not require a license, only a willing heart, and the ability to keep your voice strong when others can't. One friend died too young of cancer. Another, Guy Hoffman, of a heart attack while skiing on Chilkoot Lake. At both, Tim made the stunned mourners laugh through tears. When he addressed us all at Guy's service in the Chilkat Center for the Arts Auditorium, Tim began with a paper bag full of props. He pulled out a feather duster he had found at Guy's rustic, or let's just say well-lived-in, Mud Bay Road home. It was still in the wrapper. Guy, a woodworker known around Alaska for his lathe-turned and sometimes colorfully painted birch bowls and platters, underwrote a jazz show on the radio, and each time it was broadcast, his motto, "One good turn deserves another," was read by the announcer. His friends and family buried him in his front yard, overlooking the horseshoe pit and, in the distance, Rainbow Glacier. A group of woodworkers, including Tim, built Guy's casket and then elaborately carved the lid. Tim said it was good work to do. They planted a birch tree on top of the grave and festooned the branches with a string of colorful Tibetan prayer flags. Buddhists believe that every time the flags flutter, the prayers written on them disperse in the breeze. They also believe that anyone touched by the prayer-bearing wind will live long, be happy, and have good fortune. It makes you wonder if those sails Tim sewed so carefully had caught the prayers from all the faded flags dancing on all the old hippie porches and trees and rafters from California to Alaska. It makes you wonder if Tim knew that by playing in the wind, he'd received those prayers. Tim and Guy had also been in the local swing band together. Tim is the drummer and Guy was the clarinet player for Lunch Meat and the Pimentos. When it was time for Guy's eulogy, Tim took off his coat, tie, and Oxford cloth shirt, what I call his running for office outfit, and revealed a faded tropical Hawaiian shirt, just like Guy always wore on stage. I have a feeling it may have been the funerals over which Tim officiated more than the weddings that prompted the Junesons, as some friends are now calling Tim, June, and Sue Nelson, to marry after all these years. There is something about burying a friend that makes you want to declare what is most important to you in life. And if you are fortunate, that is true love. Also, when Guy died, Tim realized that he really and truly had survived his cancer. While he was waiting to die, he had managed to live a very full life. He figures even if the Hodgkin's disease returned tomorrow, it would not be a tragedy if it killed him. It would almost be normal. So why not just get married and make something that he and Sue had always believed in official? The good news was that when he finally asked Sue, she said yes. At their wedding reception, which was more of a big winter party in their honor, Tom made up his own version of the old Newlywed Game TV show, in which spouses answer questions the way they think their mates would. It was not just for Tim and Sue. Every married couple at the party played. But they won. When Tom asked Sue if Tim were a car, would he be a Lexus or a VW van, Sue answered that Tim was the van all the way. That was an easy guess, since everyone at the party was more van than luxury car. Mark Sebens does have that old Mercedes, but I'm not sure it still runs. Tim clinched it when he knew the answer to Tom's question, "Where was your first kiss?" as well as the month, day, and year of it. That would be Sue's mother's front porch, January 7th, 1970. I don't even remember the exact dates that Tim and Sue and I were all in Mexico, but I do know that the waves in front of the house we shared were huge, and about all we could do was dive into the curl and pop up on the other side, bob around, and try to get out again without being smashed into the sand. This was hard on my joints and a little scary for my recovering psyche. So we found another beach where I could float or snorkel gently all day long. It was about a half-hour walk past town and up and over a dirt road that cut through a cemetery. The soft, sandy cove with gentle waves was called Baby Beach because it was the best place to take small children, or Muerte Beach because it was next to the graveyard. The names reminded me of those yoga poses, the birth and the corpse positions we do so close to each other in our routine. On our last day in Sayulita, Tim Mateo mixed up margaritas, Sue cut up a pineapple, and we ate and drank on the lawn overlooking the beach as the surf crashed and the wind through the palm trees sounded a little like rain. The evening light on suntanned skin made everyone look beatific. Chip was wrong. I loved doing nothing in Mexico, and so did JJ and Stoli. I didn't miss home, or even the rest of my family. I could have stayed at least another week. I could have stayed a month. While we were partying, a woman came walking down the beach, looked up at us, and waved. It was Miss Patty Brown, a teacher from Haines, who in one of those small world coincidences also had been vacationing there. We invited her to join us, and she climbed up the stone steps from the beach to the terrace. I looked at Tim and Sue and my friends and our daughters, and I thought maybe Tim had died from his cancer. Maybe I had died. Maybe Muerte Beach, the beach of the dead, is another name for heaven. On the other hand, I thought, maybe I should quit drinking tequila. But what if that teacher who had just walked in had left Earth altogether and didn't even know it? Maybe Guy would be showing up with his clarinet soon. If being bathed in light perpetual means spending eternity with your friends and family in a place like this, with some showing up sooner and others arriving later, it's not nearly as scary as I had thought. When I think of heaven now, I hear the surf and I feel the sun of Mexico. There's another lesson to be learned from Tim. Since he no longer is living as if he is dying, he has become more like the rest of us. He spends more time away from home and Sue, speaking out on environmental issues with an evangelical zeal. The guy who lived all those days as if each one were his last has been spending a lot more of them doing things that aren't all that much fun, such as flying to Anchorage for tough talks with politicians and executives from oil and mining companies. That's really why he couldn't build my bookshelves. Over lunch in my kitchen now, he mentions a recent Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling against a proposal to dump gold mine waste into a lake between Haines and Juneau. Then he says, I tell Sue that this is all bonus time now. And when I asked if he minds the meetings and the letter writing, he says, I'm doing what I'm doing because I believe in it. He looks so stern, I hardly recognize him. But it lasts only a minute. Then he laughs. Radical stuff, huh? And reaching for more chicken, asks, so when are we going to go back to Mexico? Man, that was fun. Yeah, when are we going to go back to Mexico? Man, that was fun. Or Hawaii, or when are you going to get to come here? I guess that's a nice thing about books, isn't it? That we can travel a little by reading them right now. And I know what I'm reading at the moment is Peter Mail's, I'm not going to pronounce it right, Toujours Provence. You know, he wrote a year in Provence, and then this is the second year, right, or more, or whatever toujours means. But I just love it. And then I've also been reading the Bruno Chief Detective books because then it's like I'm going to France. And there's even a friend in Haines who's just started a book club where we're going to read actually one of the Bruno detective books and one of Peter Mail's books and two other fiction books on France, novels, and have wine to go with them. So that should be fun. Thanks again for hanging out with me. I hope you're doing okay. And we'll see you again next time when we hit, chapter 13? I think there's only 2 more left. So you might want to space them out a little bit, okay? I'm going to have one more sip and then we'll say goodbye. And I hope you sleep well tonight. And I hope I do too. That helped, though. That helped a lot. Yes. How it got here, I haven't a clue.